You okay, Aaron?
Mm-hmm. What you looking at me for?
It wasn't quite high enough to be a no, I'm not okay. All right, so Jan Wenner, I'm going to assume that, Chuck, that you and Aaron are both familiar with the saga that is the co-founder of Rolling Stone.
Yep.
Are you?
I am. Yep.
A couple years back there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do a quick recap before we dive into this. Rolling Stone magazine, 1967, it comes out. They become just an unprecedented power in the culture, specifically in rock music. And I don't think that their influence and impact can be overstated. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, kind of like the Bible in a sense.
And for the length of time that they had that was another kind of remarkable thing. But over time, Rolling Stone takes shots.
Well, they were taking shots to get people to pick up the magazine because they knew there was going to be blowback. I got to get the magazine to see what they're talking about.
Yeah.
I heard about the article. I got to read the article.
Mm-hmm.
Top 10 worst albums of 2024.
That list sucks. Ah.
Mm-hmm.
So controversy was definitely part of the DNA. But at the same time, there were some legitimate gripes about it. TLC was very public about saying that they don't want to put black people on their cover. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I think Prince, it took forever for them to put Prince on the cover.
Right?
Yeah. And Michael Jackson.
Flash forward, Jan retires and puts out a book called The Masters. There were 7 artists: Bob Dylan, Mick Jagger, Bruce Springsteen, Jerry Garcia, John Lennon, Bono, and Pete Townsend. Immediately, people are like, really? Masters, huh? No women on your list of masters?
Some masterettes.
You don't want to include them in your list?
Right.
No black people. That's kind of odd.
Yeah.
And so the New York Times does a piece on him, essentially them giving him an opportunity to kind of set the record straight.
Do a little damage control.
Or you could just as this is my opinion. I'm an old white guy.
Yeah, don't listen to me.
Complete opportunity to show that humility is not weakness.
Right.
Well said, Chuck.
And instead of walking it back, he
dug
does
his heels
what?
in.
So here's an example of the New York Times giving him an opportunity to explain. Of black artists, Stevie Wonder, genius, right? I mean, they just don't articulate at that level.
Yeah, because he's talking about masses.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm sure the New York Times writers, at least I imagine they're like,
Did he really say that?
so I'm going to give him another chance.
Yeah.
And they do. And I think it comes down to what about Joni Mitchell? And he does the same thing.
They're just there to look pretty. And
We do our makeup when we drive.
4 of the 7 people on that list are influenced by black music.
Mm-hmm.
I really wonder what they think about all this.
Just like, why did you involve me in your...
Why'd you drag me into this shit?
Yeah.
Right? So all of this is to set up the topic for this episode of Flies in the Buttermilk, which is gatekeeping. This season, we're talking about the intersection of black culture and rock music, and joining us next will be Earl Douglas Jr. from the Black Rock Coalition, who have been prying open those gates for almost 40 years. All right, welcome back to Flies in the Buttermilk. I'm Dan Stone.
I'm Aaron Nolan.
And I'm Chuck Dinkins.
And we are joined by Earl Douglas Jr. He's the executive director for the Black Rock Coalition, the author of Black Rock Volume 1, and also a penner of, I don't know if penner or a word.
It is now.
And writer of an amazing clapback to the Jan Wenner New York Times piece. First of all, thank you for joining us.
Yay!
Thank you so much for joining us, Earl.
Really happy to be here.
So talk about your reaction to the Jan Wenner book and the subsequent New York Times article, which really kind of blew the doors open. What were you thinking when you first read that?
Like a lot of people, I was just at home reading the art section of the Sunday Times, and I saw the Jan Wenner interview, and I was like, oh, cool. And I think we prefaced that. We made it very clear in the article that we were fans of the magazine.
Well, for me, it was Rolling Stone, Hit Parader, Cream Magazine, stuff like that in the 80s. Reading articles and interviews from bands, that's kind of how I learned about new music, because I was into a band, and then reading the article, I wanted to know what influenced them.
The magazine has been very, very good to the Black Rock Coalition. They gave Living Colour a cover story. David Frick wrote the article that literally changed my life, that kind of led me into the Black Rock Coalition. So I was like, okay. And I'm reading it. And then that particular section comes up and I just lost it. Because I was like, are you kidding me?
Did you have any relationship with him before then?
Never met the guy, but you have to respect the guy. The guy built something from nothing. And I read this thing and I just got really upset about it because he could have easily sidestepped and said, look, hey, these are the people I know.
Right.
So I put these guys in the book because I know them. Some of them date back over 30 years. That would have been the end of it.
Totally.
And then at a certain point, the writer kind of gives him a chance at like, are you sure you're saying this?
Yeah.
Right.
Kind of gives him an out.
Yeah, it comes back around like, did you mean to say that?
And then he kind of doubled down and I'm just kind of like, you too? And then I just picked up a pen and started researching the history of the magazine. I'm gonna look up every Rolling Stone cover. And from 67 to about 73, it's pretty balanced. But then around 73 on, it just went into this whole different direction where Black artists and rock were kind of like this. And then it's just gone. And that was kind of the impetus of where the article really kind of went into high gear. And we brought up high watermarks, like Earth, Wind, and Fire were at their ascendancy. Parliament Funkadelic was at their ascendancy. The Jackson 5 were at their ascendancy.
Yeah.
You can go on and on.
Oh, yeah.
It just got lost. And by his own admission, he made the shift. He said, we were never a rock magazine. We're a pop culture magazine. I'm like, fine. These are artists, part of pop culture.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're making the case against yourself.
Like massively successful artists at the height of pop culture got ignored. I'm like, okay, if they're the gatekeepers, if you're the pop culture gatekeepers, there's something wrong here.
Wow.
Could you imagine if, let's say, Hunter S. Thompson would go, hey, spend the week with Parliament Funkadelic.
That would be amazing.
The journalistic gold.
Wow.
The journalistic gold that was missed there.
I'm going to write that film.
Or if you spent a week with Earth, Wind, and Fire, or Tina Turner, or Nona Hendrix, who was just she's a movie unto herself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know what? I'm just going to just take it apart.
Right.
I sent it over to the BRC hierarchy, Daryl McNeil, our director of operations, LaRonda Davis, our esteemed president. And that was kind of like, okay, we'll post and that'll be our statement. And then it just took on this whole other life of its own. And then I think on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, I get an email. It was like, hey, we want to talk about this article. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to kind of spot it now because you've had this kind of flare has gone up. But like looking back on it, were there any indicators where you feel like you should have been like, oh, that's definitely a problem?
The two biggest stars of the 80s were Michael and Prince.
Right. And
how Rolling Stone treated Michael is pretty well documented.
Mm-hmm.
Off the Wall, I think did like 11 million copies or something. They did something insane. And then the concession that they made for Michael with Rolling Stone was the cover was animated.
Do a cartoon of you
because that's how we see you.
A caricature.
Did you do this with Springsteen? Did you do this with Madonna? Did you do this
with U2?
Mm-hmm.
Like you wouldn't have done this with U2. So that was kind of like the big flare. And Prince, it was very wait and see. And like, even as the movie was blowing up.
Right. I feel like it's very similar to Rick James' fight with MTV.
The other point I was trying to bring up, I was like, guys, you're leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
Man.
A lot of money on the table. Yeah.
Like, just bad business.
Black dollars are still green.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, so like they either buy it, they don't buy it, you like it, don't like it. That's it. Why are all these categories and boundaries set up? And why are Black musicians and Black artists always bearing the brunt of these categorizations?
Yeah.
Right.
The short end of the stick. That is a great question. I mean, you've been with the Black Rock Coalition for a while now. And again, I feel like one of their kind of signature fights is against this kind of thing. It kind of goes back to their origin. I might be wrong, and you can please expand on that.
Yeah, can you walk us through like Black Rock Coalition and why it came to be and the need for it?
It started in 1985. Vernon Reid, guitarist of Living Colour, Conda Mason, who was an artist representative and managing and representing artists, and Big Brother Almighty, the late great Greg Tate, who was covering this stuff. And they kept running into those same brick walls. Greg Tate affectionately called it was these bitching sessions that led to the formation of the Black Rock Coalition. It addressed segregation in radio. It addressed how out of complete and utter lack of Black music publications. Why the major music publications fail to recognize Black artists? Vernon, to this day, he goes, the Isley Brothers, they might be America's greatest rock and roll band. And he goes, Ernie Isley never got coverage in a guitar magazine. Mm-hmm. Never got a cover. Never got a feature.
Wow.
Right.
And that was a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It still is a problem.
Do you have any like kind of blueprint for how to counteract all these systemic issues, or were you just kind of like making it up and trial and error?
It was a little bit of both. I think they were using the model that was in place of what people considered rock and just put a Black face on it. So, okay, if James Taylor is rock, why not Bill Withers? So, okay, Red Hot Chili Peppers is one thing. It's like, but they opened for Fishbone.
Yeah.
Do you think that also reflected on Black media? Ebony Jet, magazines, they weren't featuring these bands either.
That was one of the other contentions that we as Black people kind of push it away. In some cases, give it away. Bo Diddley was like, they kept trying to call my music rhythm and blues. And he goes, I was never that. He goes, I was never. And, Black music was R&B. Rock music was for white people.
Earl, you had mentioned something when we had talked one time about the difference between rock and roll. Rock, the word rock is more, for some reason, assimilated to white people versus rock and roll being more inclusive with Black people. I'm just paraphrasing. I remember you saying something to that effect.
Yeah, because for a long time, when you said rock and roll, it was a lot more inclusive. Tina Turner felt, she was like, I like rock and roll more. She's like, I'm more of a rock and roller than a R&B artist. She always felt that way. You had your Bo Digleys, you had your Ray Charles, you had Aretha Franklin, you had James. That fell into the rock and roll thing. But then somewhere along the way, pretty much probably after the Beatles, it suddenly became rock. And once it became rock, it became something else.
Rock.
There was a shift. And
yeah, something shifted. Yeah.
And rock was for, any young kid with long hair. And
right.
Everything else was okay. It's R&B. It was everything but rock.
So, bringing it back to bringing it back to the Black Rock Coalition. Can you talk about where the coalition is now? Where do you see like places where we can gain real big issues that you feel like need to be addressed?
Ironically, the absence of gatekeepers, because everything is just so scattered. It's just like, okay, how do you build a network and cut through the crowd and cut through perceptions and cut through algorithms
and all the noise. Yeah.
They got to fight through all of these walls, and they're literally doing it by themselves. Is the musicianship there? Is the singing there? Is the writing there? And I think you kind of have to go back to that. You can't be a slave to the algorithm. Because we need this thing to carry on, because it will carry on. I honestly believe that, because there's always that next great thing coming, and
that is a great message to kind of wrap things up on. I think.
Earl,
thank you so much, Earl
Thank
Douglas.
you.
Godspeed, my man.
Oh, this was fun. Oh my God, I broke my podcast cherry.
What?
Yeah. First one.
Well, we are honored and humbled, and hopefully it wasn't a traumatic experience. All right, Aaron, Chuck, and I will be back with some final thoughts on gatekeeping. This is Flies in the Buttermilk. Okay, so final thoughts on Gatekeepers as we kind of wrap up this episode of Flies in the Buttermilk. Once again, I want to say thanks to Earl Douglas Jr. and the Black Rock Coalition for taking time out of their busy schedule. And I have no idea how we forgot to mention this, but the Black Rock Coalition is actually a subscription model. So, contribute to the cause by becoming a member. And you can do that on their website, which is
blackrockcoalition.org.
Socials, they are on Instagram and Facebook.
And you said that they're pretty active too.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Do you have any final thoughts on the Earl Douglas conversation, Aaron?
He's amazing. I love Earl. I'm so happy he was a guest.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we won the lottery. What about you, Chuck? You got any thoughts?
We as a group need to realize that we're all in this together. And right now, I think it's more every man for himself because there are no gatekeepers. Creating a new trend comes along. Every label wants one, but just one. So now everybody's trying to fight to be that one without helping each other out.
And I think that goes to ownership too. Like who's calling the shots, right? Well, for me, this whole conversation kind of points to how insidious the systemic racism is. Like the idea that Jan Wenner wasn't a racist, but he just didn't know any better. The system is designed in a way for people to not know any better. And so it's not necessarily their fault, is my opinion. And that we need to just be a lot better at monitoring. We need to be much better at monitoring.
Yeah.
The other point that I wanted to make was social media is the new frontier. And Earl brought that up. I would point to the fact that there are news stories coming out on the regular about how there are people on the margins that are not being heard. And that is a problem. It is effectively where we were with magazines before. We're in a place now where everybody should know. Platforms are not advocating at all. In fact, they are pretty reductive. And I think that that's where the focus should be.
And they're going to get worse.
Yes. And
But they do advocate. They advocate for themselves and for their own bottom line.
yeah.
The systemic racism is just a byproduct of that. And they know it's a byproduct and they don't care.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
And so I think it's on us to call them out on it, much like the Black Rock Coalition did with Jan Wenner and Rolling Stone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we are now. We are there now.
But that's the difficult part of it because we've gotten ourselves into a situation where just having the conversation, people get so butthurt about everything, is that
They do.
that you can't. There's these trigger words. You can't say systemic racism.
Yeah.
As soon as you say the R word, just like the N word or anything
People shut
else,
down.
people shut down and like, oh, you're calling me a racist. Like, no, I'm saying you're a victim of it too. This shit has been going on for so long that you grew up, like you said, you don't know any better. You don't even realize that you're doing it. But when I pointed out, you're so sensitive, overly sensitive. We can't even have the conversation because you think that I'm calling you something and I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, just recognize what's happening so that we can all move on together and not make the same mistakes we've made before. That's what history is.
Wonderfully said, Chuck. And I think also mutually beneficial. Everybody wins if we address this in a meaningful way. This has been Flies in the Buttermilk. Thank you for listening. You can reach out to me at dan@fitbpodcast.com.
And you can find me, Aaron, at nolamite@fitbpodcast.com.
And you can find me, Chuck, at Chuck1, the number 1 at fitbee.com.